Morning, guys. Nice to see everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd. David and I are going to go through service-orientated IT this morning. Some might know it as IT as a service, and specifically how the RES story fits into that approach to delivering services to your users. We'll try and keep it as light as we can on PowerPoint and as heavy as we can on demo. So I'm going to be your PowerPoint guy. David's going to drive the demos today. So, I guess a question: why Service Centric? We actually, when prepping for this, had a look at the Gartner IT glossary. They don't have a definition for IT as a service in their IT glossary, which I found quite amazing. The best definition that we could find was a guy on the BMC communities who came up with the phrase, a service-orientated approach to the consumption, organisation and delivery of IT such that all details of the service are abstracted from the business consumer except the service's function, capacity, cost and agreed levels of performance. Consumer being the key word, and obviously with Brian's keynote earlier he kind of focused on consumerisation of IT. I think there's a great fit here. There's a great fit to what we're doing with IT consumerisation. When we look at a service, there are essentially three key components of an IT service that deliver something within your business. There's the business requirements of that service. What does it need to deliver from a business perspective? And what are the rules from a business perspective around who should be able to access that service and how should they be able to access it? There's a technical process that sits behind it. How do you actually enable that service for the user? How do you make that service work? And then there's the delivery piece. There's the end user experience. What does it look like to the end user? How does it function for the end user? How does the end user interact with that IT service? And the makeup of that service is really, really key. To manage a service, you need to manage all three elements. We put together this model, which is closely related to the Microsoft I/O model, but looks a little bit more in depth at service-by-service consumption of IT. So there's a kind of timeline that sits here, and there's some dependencies. A lot of people aspire to delivering a service catalogue to users, delivering a catalogue of services, understanding the cost of delivering services to users within their business. Easy to talk about, not so easy to do unless you really understand A, what you've got out there today, and start to take control of how you deliver those services to users today. Once you've got that degree of control and you can actually enable the services, at that point a service catalogue becomes a feasible proposition. So discover the services that you deliver today. Look at it from a service-centric perspective. Take control of the user experience and how you deliver those services to the user today. And then start to automate the technical process that enables the service for a user. The specifics of this will become clear as we move forward. Finally, once you've got that in place, you can start to automate the business process around that. Who should have access to a service? When should they have access to it? We'll start at the beginning, discovery. Services that are in use today are absolutely key. Every one of you within your IT organisation delivers services to users. That's just what IT does. The first step in moving towards a service-centric approach is to really understand that landscape. And one really key area to this is don't just focus on applications. A lot of people will undertake application discovery within their environment. It's absolutely a valid case to do that, but adopt a more broad service approach to that. So look at printer requirements, look at data access requirements, look at application requirements, look at other services that users are using within their business. Who in your business uses Dropbox, for example? What are they using Dropbox for? Those kinds of insights into your user base are really, really important. So what we say is, don't throw out your existing tool set, but augment your existing tool set with a service-aware discovery piece. If you can take the data that you discover and use it to minimize the impact of change, then that's fantastic. And what I'll do now is I'll hand over to David to show you our approach to data discovery, our approach to service discovery, and how we can use the data we discover in terms of starting to manage applications and services for users. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Adam. So whilst I switch this over, have a show of hands. Who's thinking of putting in IT as a service in their environments? 4 people are thinking of it. And you're all here in IT as a service. Excellent. Okay, cool. So what we have is, as Adam talked about, the gap analysis, that kind of looking at where you are now, that state of play, and finding out what you've got in your environment, what's actually being used as opposed to what you think is being used. So I've got some reports here from part of our technology. This is an agentless technology that we have. And it produces some reports that kind of give you an understanding of where you are. So the kind of reports that we get out of this are PDFs, and it can start to give you some nice reports that kind of show you, quite graphically to start off with, what kind of systems you have out there, what kind of PCs, chassis types, etc. But as we start to drill down into the report, some more useful information around what applications are mostly used and what applications are least used. So you may have an application set, for example, that's completely deployed everywhere, but only 20% of your users use it, and you're paying license and maintenance, etc. on those services. So I'm not going to go through this whole report, but it can show you around roaming versus non-roaming users, your printer topography, your IP locations, etc. And that's just one of the reports. There's a whole host of information behind this as well, but these are the nice reports that kind of show you it graphically for using your own documents, etc. And another interesting one is who uses Dropbox? A few more people. Then everyone else is asleep, possibly. So, do you allow Dropbox to be used in your organizations is one question, and then the next question is, but do you know if it's being used in your organization? So, just as part of the reports, we also have reports on things like Dropbox that will go out and tell you how many users, what they're using Dropbox for, what kind of information they're saving in Dropbox, and how much storage it's taking. So that if you move towards a on-premise secure storage service that's similar, and guess what, we have that technology that can do that, that's on-premise and controlled, encrypted, etc., and provide that to your users, then you have that ability to scale, calculate the scaling, work out what people are actually doing, and also have then the capability of moving all that from the Dropbox into your internal system so you have control and policy of that. So that's just some simple reports. But how does that help you as well? So you have some nice reports, you kind of understand where you stand, but actually what we need to do is get some of that information into your environment. So what I'm going to do is, because it's a technical conference, I'm going to show you the console. This is one of our consoles that we have, and that's a list of applications, if you can see it. These are applications that we currently manage. So at the moment, we don't manage all the applications. So what I'm going to do is take that information that we've already gathered. I've got an application that I want to manage and control within the environment, and actually import that into our system. So we have a wizard, as all good software does. And in this case, it's applications. I want to look at the applications, actually look at printers or pretty much anything we've got there, drive mappings, etc. And I just open some files. And now we can look at the environment that I've already scanned and say, I know all the applications, all the services, it's applications in this case, and I can start to look for the particular one I want to manage. In this case, it's a human resources application. I know it's out there, I'm not quite sure who's got it, why they've got it, if they're using it, etc. But my analysis tells me exactly who's got it, why they've got it, and how they've got it. So what conditions need to apply for those people to get it. So for example, membership of organizational units, etc. But in this case, I only want people who are part of the HR system security group to have applications. So what I'm going to do is just click on the HR group, click next, and it tells me straight away, Adam Stockley has this application, and he should have. But it also tells me, if I continue with this, and the way the checkbox that I clicked on, who will get the application who didn't have it before, but also who has it now, and we might take it away from them. So you can alter your settings and make sure that the right people are getting the right applications. So what I'm going to do is just click next, and then finish. And what that's done is it's imported the application settings into our system. So I can look at that application, and I can start to manage it through our system. Okay. So what I'll do after the next section is show you how that impacts a user. So that was just an example of how simple it is to find applications and manage them.
Thanks, David. So I think a really important thing there is Baseline Desktop Analyzer is a free tool. It's hosted in Microsoft Azure. It's infrastructureless. You don't need to implement any infrastructure to gather this information, and that's very, very important. As I said, augment your tool set with it. Don't replace your existing reporting tools. It's about augmenting the tool set with some information about that service. And then take use of that freely discovered information to start to take control of those services, take control of those applications and manage them in a better way. That kind of moves us into a delivery phase. Once we've understood the services that are out there, the services that are in use by the users, and minimize the impact of change by, as David showed with the wizard there, the ability to take information that we know and understand what is the impact of us setting a rule that says members of the HR group must get this application. Who's going to get the access to that service in addition to those who currently have access? Then we can start to really tightly manage that, that service. And that comes in a service delivery layer. Quite often I talk to customers and they say, we want our users to have the same experience wherever they go. I argue that point. No, you don't. Actually, you want them to have a relevant experience wherever they go. You want them to have IT services delivered to their desktop that are relevant to the context in which the user exists. Very important. It's really key. There are some great examples that we can talk around how services need to differ depending on the delivery platform, the changing delivery platform that a user might need. For example, take email access. You don't want someone to have offline email access configured in a VDI environment. That's the way you're going to deliver the service when a user is in that particular environment. However, user logging on from a laptop, absolutely you want them to have offline capability. So you're going to deliver the service in a different way to the user based upon the changing context. We use a technology called a Workspace Layer. And the Workspace Layer adapts to the changing context of the user, the changing delivery platform, the changing location of the user to deliver services that are appropriate to them and services that are configured in a way that's appropriate to the environment in which the user exists. Workspace layers are quite cool because they're transparent. You don't have to manage everything that's delivered into the Workspace layer. So if there's stuff that you don't want to manage, if there's stuff that's really simple, you don't really care how the user consumes it, it can just be delivered in the native way, absolutely don't manage it. Use a merged workspace and deliver stuff through that Workspace layer. The key is a Workspace layer is a really simple, flexible way to get the services to the consumer that they need when they need them. How it works, it's quite a wordy slide this, so I'm going to ignore most of it. It sits over the top of the OS, the stack, the app stack, the user stack that sits underneath. And it adapts. So we've got a guy here working during work hours. We might connect him to some corporate applications, Office, SAP, some Mac network drives, Mac printers, those kinds of things. Outside of hours, we want to change that experience slightly. We want to deliver him a bit of flexibility. We give him Facebook, keep him happy. He might have an iPhone that he needs to synchronize. We'll give him iTunes. Out of hours, not a problem. We'll connect him to local data resources, local drives, local printers. You might have a user that's connecting from a FAT PC, a FAT device that has DVD or CD burning capabilities. Give them Nero, give them access to use that data. However, when they're connecting from a VDI environment, maybe via a tablet, they won't have the hardware capability. Don't give them that application. Make the workspace layer adapt, the services adapt to the context in which the user exists. Here we've got a user working from home. We've given him access to a SIP client. Well, if you can call Skype a SIP client, a voice over IP client. However, working from the office, the guy's likely to have access to the PBX. He doesn't need access to a SIP client. If you do give him access to a SIP client, he's likely to use it for personal calls. So remove that from him. Deliver the stuff that's relevant to him at that moment in time. What I'd like to do is hand over to David again. David's going to look at how we then manage that HR application to actually deliver it to a user.
So back in my demo environment, what I'm going to do is go to a Windows 7 machine and log myself on. So the desktop that's at the top now, which is dynamic, giving the right applications, the right services, the right access, the right security, etc., at the right time, in the right place, based on the user, etc., is what's being sorted out there. And I've got my desktop. Now you'll notice on my desktop that I have the HR system. And that HR system was what I configured before, what I imported into the system and said these people should have it. 2 people will add it on myself. So that application has been delivered dynamically to my desktop. And that desktop is dynamic. If I actually remove the capability for me to have it, it will go from my desktop without me having to log off, without me having to close sessions down, etc. So I have the application there. And if I go back to my configuration, I can look at that application and start to configure it. So a lot of things have been configured for us already. But for example, where do I want it? Do I want it on the desktop? Do I want to make it mandatory or voluntary, etc.? Do I want to, for example, automatically run it when the user logs in? And I can then set controls around that application. So for example, how many instances are the user allowed to run, the way it interacts with the processors and the memory, etc. What kind of file types. I'm not going to go through all these because there's a lot of information we can do. But around licensing, what are the licensing implications of that application? So do I want to limit the number of concurrent licenses, etc. in use? Do I have site licenses, etc.? And things like notifications. When the user runs the application and something is in a situation where they're not allowed to use it or the application shouldn't work, so for example, they're not actually connected to the corporate network, so they can't access the data resources, instead of just failing, put a message up that says, the reason you can't use this application at the moment is because of X. Please contact the IT department if you need to know more, or links in that kind of thing. And we have access control. So we mentioned before about who gets this application and when. So we have access, which is around identity, who the user is when they log on, when they authenticate themselves. We know who that user is. But actually, we also want to look at locations. So I can look at locations here and say, from a network perspective, I only want them to access this application if they're in London, in the London headquarters on floor 1. We can get this down to offices. It depends on different ways how you identify your networks and other ways of identifying your location, but we can look at that and say, unless they're in this location, they cannot use this application. So for a HR system, for example, we can turn that down and say, we don't want them using the HR application when they're away from the office, etc. And I can put time restrictions in place. Advanced and basic, we can say they can only use this application during certain hours. And there is a whole host of other bits of information I can have, like could we track the user settings for that application. So as they roam from computer to computer, into Citrix, into VMware VDI, and so on, all these different sessions, laptops, PCs, do we want that user, the configuration of that application that the user changes, for user personalization, do we want that to follow them? And then in security, we can put around that. So are they allowed to use this? For example, users are often standard users on Windows 7. But if the application itself requires admin rights, then it's obviously not going to work for a standard user, but we can dynamically modify the administrative privileges for the application itself. So we inject the admin token into the application for the user. So the user stays as standard user. And so by configuring that application, when I go back to a Windows 7 machine where I'm logged on, I can then start to look at how that application interacts. It will be configured dynamically. So when I launch the application, all the configuration elements that I put in there will be injected. And you just saw it disappear because I've disabled it in my group. So you can see how then it just disappeared because I disabled it. It goes away. So as you saw then, a very dynamic way we can either take applications or put them there. But that could be services as well. But it also means that, as I said before, the environment becomes very dynamic. What we're going to do is hand back to Adam.
Thanks, David. So Workspace Manager is what we're using to manage that environment. It's all about taking services on a service-by-service basis and delivering them to the user in a way that's appropriate for that service, appropriate to the context of the user. The next extension to that, and an extension that we often see running in parallel in terms of implementation timeframes, is the enablement of services. Think about something like email. Email as a service. It's great to deliver Outlook to the user. It's great to configure Outlook in a way that's appropriate to the context in which the user exists. But what else is making up that service? What about the actual privilege of having a mailbox for the user? Where does that mailbox sit? What distribution lists does a user need to be a member of? In order to make email work for the user, there's a whole bunch of other stuff other than just delivering the Outlook client to them and configuring the Outlook client in a way that works for the user. And that's what enablement's about. It's about doing that legwork, doing that repeatable stuff that needs to be done to make services work for users. It's absolutely key in ensuring that you get accurate, i.e. take human error out of the equation, timely delivery of services. Simple installation isn't enough. A lot of people kind of get slightly confused at this point and think we're talking about a tool that can simply install applications for users. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about IT workflows. We're talking about a series of tasks that can make a service work for a user. So consider the full workflow of delivering a service, not just installing a piece of software, not just the client software, but the actual back-end legwork that your help desk would normally perform in order to make services work for the user. Everyone delivers services today, either in an automated or a manual fashion. It's a given. That's the way IT works. If you automate those processes, you will remove human error and you will speed up service enablement for users. That delivers a better experience for your users. It delivers a better impression of the IT team. It's generally a better way to do things. Following on from kind of the discovery piece where I talked about not throwing a baby out with the bathwater, not getting rid of your existing discovery tools but augmenting them, if you've got stuff that you automate today using SCCM, using Tivoli, using Altiris, all of these kinds of tools that are out there, possibly even using scripts, PowerShell scripts, VB scripts, these kinds of tools, reuse it. Use a tool that enables you to integrate with those third-party systems. Reuse the IP that you've already developed in automating service delivery and build it into a broader workflow. What I'd like to do is, again, hand over to David and get David to show you Automation Manager, which is our process for automating IT workflows.
So going back to my desktop, where I've logged in, as you can see, the desktop you saw before, we have 5 icons on the desktop, and that will change shortly. So what I'm going to do is just go back to my console and show you Automation Manager, which looks like that. So there are lots of automation tasks. Some automation tasks are more complex than they seem. So for example, something as simple as joining a computer to a domain is more than just joining the computer domain, it's also about rebooting that machine as well, because that's the requirement of that. So larger tasks involve lots of smaller tasks. And we have about 150 plus pre-configured tasks that can be you fill in information. So it was kind of hard to figure out what I was going to demonstrate from a that, so I could demonstrate the whole product would be impossible. So what I'm going to do is show you how easy it is to create a new simple task. So I'm going to create a new task here, and I'm going to call it add a folder. And it wants to know what tasks. So this is our list of tasks that we have. I say there's a lot of tasks in there, everything from all the standard stuff you'd expect, create Active Directory users, Exchange users, SMTP traps, and so on.
I think it's worth mentioning that we support Linux agents as well, so we can execute tasks on SUSE, Red Hat, AIX machines as part of an automated workflow. That's quite relevant.
Query, provisioning, configuration. I'm not going to go through them all. What I'm actually going to do is perform a file task, a very simple task. So it wants to know now what type of file tasks do I want to create. So in this case, all I'm going to do is just create a folder. And I'm going to create a folder on the desktop of my login. So I need a security context around it to do that. And I need the path that I want to create. So in this case, I'm going to use a hard-coded path because it's a demonstration, but you can use variables, you can use formula in here as well, so we fully support formula, etc. So that's it. I have a task that does the job. That is pretty much in the system now. And that can be reused and exported and imported to systems. It goes to an XML system, so you can manually edit these things externally as well. And because this is a test, I'm just going to manually schedule this task to work. And it wants to know where I want it to work. Well, I actually want it to work on my Windows 7 machine. And then, OK. So that's it. I was creating a task that's going to create a folder and executing that task. So this is not just about end devices like PCs, it's also for servers. It can pretty much talk to any system and configure anything. So the task is completed. It says it's completed correctly. It took 2 seconds. So what I need to do now is just go back onto my desktop. And there you see I have a folder called test folder. So something as simple as that, actually getting information or configuring machine or multiple machines, very simple to do and very simple to action that very quickly. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Adam.
Thanks, David. So Automation Manager is a great utility tool. And actually, as techies, you can kind of take it as far as you like. One of the best, we use a term runbooks. A workflow is a runbook. One of the best runbooks I've seen, best uses of a runbook I've seen recently is, some of you may have seen it if you attended Synergy, the use of Automation Manager to build an entire Citrix proof of concept environment. We've got that down to less than an hour now, from kicking off the runbook to having a complete Citrix environment with provisioning server, with Zen app, with Zen desktop, and all the bits and pieces that you need to run a Citrix POC. So Automation Manager is a really useful tool, and when you relate it to delivering services, it does that legwork that typically you might expect a help desk to do. When you're looking at Automation Manager, one of the things that we often talk about is look at your help desk calls. Help desk calls are nothing more than service requests from users. They're requests for service from your IT department. So help desk tools and automating the process behind those help desk calls can have a real instant return on investment for customers. In terms of the next step, once you are able to deliver services to a user, once you're able to control how that experience works for the user, you can then start to think about a service catalog and actually making this a self-service environment. The service catalog automates the business workflow. It looks at the user, the requirement for the service, and it delivers them appropriate. Now at this stage, a lot of people say to me, we need an app store. Yeah, kind of. But apps are only part of the catalogue. Apps should only form part of your service catalogue. If you've done the discovery piece correctly, you will know that you deliver an awful lot more services to users than just those applications. Apps can't address all requirements. If you're pushing towards ITIL or ISO 20K, then service catalogue is actually a key part of that compliance, that requirement. So we say implement a service store. And there's subtle but fundamental difference between a service store and an app store. The service catalogue itself is a mechanism that automates the business workflow. So it understands who should receive the service in the first instance, or who should have access to the service. It understands what the trigger for service delivery should be. Should a user receive that service immediately they qualify? Should they have the ability to request the service? Perhaps the service should be requested on their behalf by a manager or someone along those lines. It should also have the ability to enforce an approvals process if that's required. Fred has asked for access to Visio. Should he have access to it? Is there someone who maybe manages the Visio license pool who has to grant him access to Visio if that's what he wants? And it should launch the technical process to actually deliver that service to the user. Now that could be something as simple as adding a user to a security group to give them access to an AppV packaged application, really straightforward, or perhaps a Citrix published application. Or it could be to trigger off the process of locally installing that application on the user's workstation. The process can be tweaked and delivered in the way that's most appropriate for you. Finally, and probably almost as important as any other stage, it should deal with the return of the service. What happens when that user no longer wants or no longer qualifies for that service? It should be returned to the catalogue. The classic is when a user leaves a business. Actually, at that point, all of their services should be returned. A core service would be an Active Directory username and password. It's a service that you deliver to the user. And the ability to tombstone the user's account, stick it in a deleted user's OU, change the password, disable the account, archive their mailbox, archive their home directory. It's part of an offboarding process. It's part of that return process that you want to deliver through a service catalogue. Now, we're going to dive into quite a long demo now of how service orchestration fits together and how we can tie all of the elements together to deliver a really, really great experience to users within your business. So I'll hand back to David and I might sit down for this bit.
So the demo I'm going to show you now is kind of all the technologies fitting together and how that impacts the user and how that impacts the IT department. So what I normally do is ask for a volunteer from the audience. But as it's a session I'm not going to because there's a lot of people here, etc. So what I'm going to show you is my console here. So this just happens to be my console PC, and there are kind of going around the screen we've got here. We've got a HR application, we've got email at the bottom there in the middle, a shrunken version of it, and I have a self-service orchestration client on the right-hand side. Now you will see messages pop up on that, and I can also request actions or services to happen. So I have some services on there already called onboard user and retiree user. One way I can do self-service, but I want to show you more of the technology and how that really works. So I have a human resources application. When a new user joins a company, it's usually the first place where the user gets entered into the system. Potentially finance, but very often the HR system. They're not in the HR system, they're not employed with the company. So this is a very simple HR system, and we have a few people in the company already. This is RES, and there's Adam.
I should hesitate to add, I should interrupt there, and we've got more than 7 employees.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new employee. So normally I'd choose someone from the audience, but I think for this case I'll create a Jane Doe or someone. So I'm going to create Jane Doe. So this is Jane Doe. I'm going to give her a mobile number of 123, and I'm going to put her in the finance department.
It's worth emphasising this could be any third-party database, any ODBC compliant database, PeopleSoft, SAP. It's not part of the product, it's just a standalone HR database.
This is an example of a HR database. But it's a real working system. So when I click accept, Jane Doe is now in the HR system. I might have to put some more details in there, but what's happening in the background is our workflow technology is working on that change the HR database. So if I show you what's happening in the background, we've got the HR database. It's actually talking to a SQL database. That's what its core is at the background. And we have monitoring that, our automation service. So when I created a new user, our workflow ring fences what needs to be done and what happens. So that's invoking the business process around what happens when a new user is onboarded. So in this case, there will be a request for authorization. For example, can this user join? Is this information correct? Answer those questions. But also, potentially, requests for further information. So it might be the IT department, what's their NT login name going to be? What's from the finance department, what's their security number, etc. And these requests can be in multiple forms, iPads, iPhones, emails, pop-up messages, and so on. So it's a rules-based intelligence system, so it's not just going to go to specific people necessarily. It could be go and ask a manager in a certain department with a cost center of X, and we'll ask those people, maybe in sequence, maybe all together. And if they don't respond within 10 minutes, go and ask someone else, etc. So for the demonstration, I've not done authorization because it would take too long to show my iPhone and try and get that up on the screen. So what's then happening, assuming the authorization and information requests have come back, then I'm going to onboard that user in the Active Directory. I'm going to create them an email in whatever email system, in this case Exchange 2010. I'm going to create them in the file and print services, make sure they've got places for their user data, etc. Update the HR system, so let the HR system know that this new information has arrived and maybe fill in some empty fields. And then also other services. So for example, making sure that the Citrix farm has enough capacity to take on this next user. If it doesn't, build another Citrix server, join the farm, make sure there's enough resources there. And that could be provisioning anything from VDI to demo systems to join servers to pretty much anything. And then other kind of non-classic IT systems like building security, making sure that building security know this person's joining. In fact, potentially talking directly to the building security databases and adding that user in. Making sure that telephony people have the correct telephone number, even if it's outsourced and through multiple areas. Chances are your telephones in multiple systems, AD, security, reception, outsourcing, HR systems, finance people, all have a copy of your telephone number. And then many other services. And the advantage of doing it this way is that it's compliant, it's consistent, it's auditable. You know it's going to happen the same way every time, and you can show that it does. And at the end of the day, it's also error-free. There's no real human intervention here that can make mistakes, transpose numbers, etc. So you'll notice here in the HR application, I have a little green tick by Jane Doe, and that tells me that user has been fully onboarded. And I have an email message now down here that says Jane Doe's been onboarded. So the manager of that department, for example, gets a confirmation email to say everything's happened, the whole process has happened. So let's log Jane on.
It's worth talking about. Is it worth mentioning what's actually happened from that perspective? So specifically for Jane, she's had an Active Directory user account created. She's had a mailbox created, a home directory created. I'm not sure what else you've got in there.
Yeah, I did that in the PowerPoint. Hopefully everyone's paying attention. So all those systems have happened, and that's happened real as well. So this is a live demo, this is not smoke and mirrors, that actually happened, and that was the process. She was actually onboarded in about 35 seconds. In the real world, we see that probably about 60 seconds to onboard a user through all IT systems. So we've seen. Okay, so we can really bring those processes down. So the idea here is that Jane is going to walk into the office Monday morning. The first office she walks into in London. She goes up to the first machine she comes up to, and she can log in. So it's jane.doe, and I'm going to log her in. The machine that we're logging into here is a Windows XP machine. It's a base install machine, so there's nothing special about it, nothing pre-configured. I also have no group policy or login scripts. So all of what you're about to see happens without any of that process. I'm not saying everyone should throw group policy out, scripts out. We all have a lot of investment in that. But as you see how the technology advances those systems, you can start to see how we move across in small steps from those into a system that provides context-aware services and IT as a service. So, relatively fast login there. I hope you all agree. That was from onboarding the user right through to log on. Login takes, in this case, it's about 20 seconds. So if you've got login issues, you can see how it really starts to bring those times down. And we have a message of the day there for Jane. It says, "Welcome, Jane," and welcome to the company. But as we look around the desktop, you'll notice in the top right it says Finance Floor 1. We know where Jane is. So physically we know her location, we know who she is, and we can use that context and the time and the device that she's on to decide what she should have at the moment: applications, services, access control, security, etc. As we look at my desktop, I've got a nice blurred screen up in front of you that says policies. So we have a folder with some policy documents on. Jane already has all the documents she needs to make sure she's familiar with corporate policy, etc. We have a remote desktop connection here, and we have a little star that says London CC, under congestion charge. The reason for that is people on the first floor are in London, and they often need to know about the congestion charge. So if I double click on that, I haven't got a live connection here, so I can't show you the full website, but I get a pop-up box that just tells Jane that she is being, corporate access to the internet is being monitored, so that she knows that she's aware of that. And I click OK, and then whichever browser we've decided will launch, and there it goes to transport to London. So I'm not going to spend too long in the Windows XP side, but just to give you an idea of how easy it is to transition from XP across all the other systems, I'm going to launch Word. Now Word, that was the first time launch of Word. So again, no pre-configuration here. It didn't ask me any document formats, how often I wanted to do the updates, what were my initials. None of that was asked. And the reason is we dynamically configure that application. So based on the information we know, we can configure the application specific to this session at this time. And if I look in the options, hopefully you can see it says Jane Doe. So from a profile perspective, I'm not really using any particular profile here. It doesn't matter whether I'm using roaming profiles, I'm using mandatory profiles, or local. It really becomes irrelevant. Profile information, at the moment Jane doesn't have a profile at all because she has no user customization. Everything to the profile at the moment is machine specific or configured on the fly. So what I'm going to do is change the color of Office to black. Jane now has a profile. So she has some personalization. And actually what happens is that personalization now becomes transient. So it's completely transient across all your systems. Whether it's remote desktops, VDI, laptops, PCs, it doesn't matter. That personalization will follow her. Even if it's like Citrix publish apps to an iPad, it will follow her. But let's just have also a look at Outlook. Again, Outlook is not going to ask any questions around who the user is, which servers do I need to connect to, all that kind of thing. It's just going to launch and work perfectly. And it does that every time on every machine. And I'm just going to create a new email for Jane. And again, you can see the signature's already been set up. It says Jane Doe. Again, we've got the location there, London headquarters, floor 1. We can customize signatures based on the context that we know about the user. So for example, if you go abroad and you go to America, for example, we could put a completely different signature in there or modify it for a different disclaimer, so that if you work in different countries, for example. But also, that could be something as simple as branding. So if you have a company where you use multiple brands in different offices because they're customer focusing, we can rebrand the desktops on the fly based on the fact you just walked into that office. So what I'm going to do here is just go to my remote desktop, and this is going to connect me to a terminal services session. Go. And I'm going to log Jane into a remote session. So I'm still logged into the Windows XP side, and I'm going to log into the terminal services side. So again, our technology is working there. Excellent. Do you look like demos? I told you it's live. Don't worry, self-heals, self-repairs, not a problem. I've got fingers crossed now. There we go. So, what we have again, so this is a remote session. So this is in a data center somewhere. But you'll notice the backdrop says Finance Floor 1. We still know where Jane is, even though it's a remote session. And because we know where she actually is, we can set up the correct environment even within that terminal services site. So she still has access, for example, to the documents she had access to. We don't have a remote desktop connection on here because she's already on a remote desktop. We have the star that says London congestion charge, and I know that's very hard to read. And we have a new application which actually says scientific analysis. And if I try and launch it, I get a pop-up box that says it needs authentication. So what I've got here is an application that we've decided is a high-value application. Even if Jane walks away from her machine, we don't want anyone just coming up and using it, so she could leave her laptop on a train, whatever it was. And so if she launches it, she actually has to re-enter her credentials, and then we can launch that application. Now the reason that application is there and it wasn't on the Windows XP desktop was simply because Windows XP is 32-bit, and this is a server which is 64-bit. And we've decided that this application is a 64-bit only application. Jane is allowed to have it, but we're only going to give it to her when she has 64-bit. And you'll see I have the same applications for Jane as well. So for example, I'll launch Word, and Word is going to launch in black because we customized that when we were in the Windows XP side. So again, that personalization is transient, it follows her wherever she goes. So let's also have a look at, for example, some printers. Again, this is a terminal services session. However, the printers say floor 1, black and white, and colour. So we've determined, based on where she actually is, which printers she should get, because those are the nearest printers to her, which one's the default, black and white one, and which one's the secondary, as a colour. I'm going to leave that terminal services session open when I go to Windows 7 in a moment, because when I come back to it later, when my locations change, you'll see things like the printers and the desktop dynamically change and modify itself because the end point that I'm coming in from will have changed. So, Jane likes to leave all her sessions open. And what I'm going to do now is she's been asked to do a task which involves going up to the second floor of London HQ, but they're in the process of change and migration to Windows 7. They've already got some of the machines on Windows 7. She walks in, sits down at the desk and logs in, and as you can see, this is Windows 7. So I will log in Jane on here. And again, this is a Windows 7 machine. Nothing is special about it. It's just a base install, no pre-configuration, no group policy doing anything. This is just going to be our technology. So what's going to happen is when Windows accepts the authentication is that Jane will get the same, or as Adam said before, not identical, similar and relevant experience in that environment. So what we've got here is a very similar environment. But you'll notice in the top right, it now says Finance Floor 2. We know that Jane has moved to a new location. I also get a little pop-up message saying, just to let Jane know that her printers have changed. So logging on here, I have a different set of printers. But my environment looks very similar. I still have my policies in the top left there. I have my 64-bit analytical application because it's Windows 7 64-bit. I have my remote desktop, and I have my little star for London congestion charge. But you'll notice it now says, hopefully if you can read it, it says Manchester Metro. So I've got an application here that normally says London congestion, but people on floor 2 often go to Manchester, so it's more relevant to give them something about Manchester. So I can double click on that. It looks the same, but the actual context is changing and give them a more relevant experience. So what I'm doing here is going to Manchester Metro, which, again, as I say, hopefully will come up. Yep. Same icon, same desktop, but I get a slightly different view of the world based on where I am. So let's just take that to a bit more interesting. This is my self-service client that I have here with some services that I've pre-set up. These services are, again, based on context. Who I am, where I am, what time of day it is, etc. And as Jane, what I'm going to do is go to Facebook. Facebook.com. For some reason it's relatively popular. And immediately Jane is told she can't do that. The reason for that is, during working hours, if she's in the office on a corporate machine, she's not allowed to access Facebook. But, in this case, Jane has to update the corporate Facebook page, so she needs temporary access to do that. And I have a service here that I'm just going to click on that says temporary Facebook access. And I'm going to request that service. Normally, to do that, you have to phone IT up. IT will probably accept that, pass that on to some other IT team, which will add you to a security group maybe, and then you have to log off, log back in again, and so on. But what you can see here is already it says access to Facebook is under review. And that's because a message has gone out to a manager, in this case, to say, can this person have access? And what can we do about it? And in the background, as I say, I'm not switched on the authorization because that would be hard to show you on an iPhone. But it's going to automatically answer that question. And authorization has been given, and it says there, access to Facebook has been granted. And if I click on that message, it tells me your manager has granted access to Facebook for 1 minute only. So I better do something quite quickly. So I'm going to go back into Facebook again. I'm not logging off, I'm not even closing the browser down. What you'll see is it will go off and it will connect to Facebook and everything will be very happy and it will work. There we go. So we've almost got this immediate help desk level 1 team who would normally have quite a large task to do of taking the call, figuring out what the user wants, figuring out who has to authorize it, sending it off to other teams so they can do other pieces of work, and eventually they come back and they say they've done the work, contact the user back again and say that's happened, can you log off, log back in, whatever you need to do. In this case, it's very simple. The user requested it, without even contacting the IT help desk, and it was approved and the whole process went through. As I say, that could also be done by help desk level 1. So instead of getting help desk level 1 to pass on the calls, they could do it themselves. So they could have a console that allowed them to do that. And you might notice I've just got another message that has come up, which says access to Facebook is expiring. So that's the 1 minute timeout that I've decided to put on this in this scenario. So again, the automation, the workflow is happening in the background. I was only allowed the access for 1 minute. That 1 minute's expired, and my access to Facebook is now expired. If I click on the message, it says access has expired and been removed. But I've still got the web page up, so hopefully I can just click on a link. For example, I'll just click on log me in, and what a surprise, it goes back and tells Jane that she's not allowed access. That has been expired, it happened real time, and it was removed from that. That's just a simple example. Let's have a look at what else we've got out there. So I've got an iTunes application here, and rather than take iTunes away from Jane, I've just put control around it. It says, in this case, she's only allowed to use iTunes between 9 and 5 p.m. and when she's at home. So instead of having to ring help desk, why is iTunes gone from my desktop, or why doesn't it work? We give them relevant messages that stops them making those help desk calls, and actually gives the user a much better experience so that they can understand what's happening. And of course, if we go and look at things like Word, remember I configured it to change the color when I was in Windows XP, that went to Terminal Services session. Obviously that then transcends into the Windows 7. And if I go into Outlook, what you'll see is, again, Outlook is just going to launch without asking any questions. And if I create a new email message, you'll see that Jane's signature's changed and it now says floor 2. So let's just have a look at a few other bits and pieces we've got here that we can do dynamically. These are the printers that I've got access to for Jane. So we have floor 2 black and white and floor 2 colour. Makes sense, she's on floor 2 now, she gets the floor 2 printers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to launch Publisher. And publisher is an example. It could be a specific application, like the HR application. It just launches as you would expect. But if I go back to printers and devices, you will notice I have a third printer called Cloud A3 in this example. So the idea here is that specific applications can have specific configurations. So when I launched Publisher, it said I have to have access to a particular printer. It could be I have to have access to a particular drive mapping, or a data access, or I could require an ODBC connection, or I require some special configuration or variable setup on the machine. All those things can be done dynamically and just in time as the application launches. So, let's have a look at what else we can do. I showed you that we have some services here. And a classic example is you want to do a task that you've not done before. So Jane, in this case, is going to be asked to edit some documents. So I'm just launching the Windows Explorer, and you'll see that I have access to some drive letters, a home drive, a finance drive. If I go into the finance drive, I have access to some finance documents. But what I actually want is access to the manager's documents, because I need to edit the corporate business review. So how do I get access to them? So the normal process might be that you ring up the IT department, or the manager does, and says, can you give access to Jane to this drive mapping and give her privileges and make sure she can do the job to edit those documents. But I only want to give it to her for this week, and when she goes home at 5 o'clock, take those privileges away because I don't want her editing anything outside of working hours. And she's off on Thursday, so don't give it to her on Thursday. It's complex, it's not going to happen. End of the day, IT departments generally cannot support that kind of request. So I could use the self-service client on the right-hand side as a manager to do that. But to kind of show a bit more about technology, I have 2 USB keys here. There's nothing special about these, they're just standard RES keys. There's nothing on them either. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plug it into a machine. In this scenario, when we talk about the context, we've also talked about the endpoint device. What is that device? By plugging in that USB key, when Windows recognizes the key's been plugged in, and remember this is going through Windows Workstation, so it takes a little bit longer, we recognize that the hardware has changed. And because the hardware has changed, then the context of Jane has changed. So something about her environment has changed. And what we do then is we reevaluate what she's allowed, reevaluate security, the drive mappings, printers, everything around that, and make sure that it's compliant with IT. So, Windows 7 is going to take a little while to recognize that USB key. I'm using USB keys as an example. The idea is that the IT manager hands the USB key to Jane, she hands it back at the end of the day, very simple. So, I'm just using it as a simple token. What we're really looking at is, we're looking at the serial number and the manufacturer of that key. That's all we're looking at. So you can do this with all your own keys, etc. But it's just an example of how to do it, not necessarily the way you should do it. So Windows 7 is just recognizing that, and it'll pop up to say that it's put it on as a drive letter shortly. So we could do this through many different methods, and I'll show you a different method shortly of doing this. I have to sit here and wait for Windows 7 to recognize the key, which is always a good thing in a demo. Once it's happened, let's say we reevaluate that rule set. So when Windows pops up and says it's found it, it will actually reevaluate our desktop and we'll get changes. So what's going to happen is we're going to get a new drive letter. I love that in demos. So I told you it's a live demo. So this is because I'm using VMware Workstation. When you plug it in, it has to do a special driver and map it into the system. And of course, in this case, Windows decided it's going to take an awful long time to recognize the fact that I've got a USB key in. Sorry? Well, actually, it's put the driver in, but Windows hasn't recognized it fully. So Windows 7 has recognized there's a new drive there. I can't use it because Windows hasn't fully recognized it. And it has now. There we go, removable drive. And then Windows will pop up a message to tell me that. Thank you very much. We will in a second. It's now actually recognized. I've got my little light on. There we go, thank you. So Our technology is there, it recognises this key now and says, Jane, you've now got temporary access to a drive letter 2. So you'll notice I've got a new drive letter. If I double click on that, I have some files. So I've now been given access to another area of data. And it looks perfectly normal. I have some Excel files and an access database there. And you can see it says it's an access database, etc. But Jane doesn't have access installed. So it looks correct, and the reason I've done that is so that the user experiences that everything looks the way it should do. And then if someone tries to do something that we weren't expecting, then we can act on that behavior later. So as an example, if I try and double click on the contacts database, it says, I don't have this software installed, and I need access database. Please go to the self-service portal or ring your help desk. So I could ring the help desk and ask them to provide access. I could go to my little request down here, which is self-service, and I can request software from here. And I have a list of software, for example. But what I'm going to do is show you an example of integration. So what I'm going to show you now is an ASP.NET portal. This is not something we provide, this is just an example of integration. So I built this myself. It was quite simple, it's just ASP.NET, but it gives you an example. If you've already got those services, if you've already got that investment and time into a central portal, you can just do this and add these services in. So I have some user services here, for example, change my mobile number. I have some IT services, chat to IT, that kind of thing. And I have an app store in there as well. So I can click on Microsoft Access 2010 and click OK. So that's it. I've kind of requested Access 2010. Now, again, what's actually happening in the background is that request has gone into the workflow engine. The workflow engine will ask the right people if that's allowed, check the licensing, make sure all those kind of things are correct. In my case, it's going to do it automatically and say yes. And I've already got a message that says it's been accepted by my manager. So my manager in this case has got a pop-up on their iPhone and they've gone, yep, I'm going to accept that, I'm going to pay for that, whatever it is, here's a cost center, click OK, and that application will now be delivered to my desktop. So already I've been sent a message saying it's been deployed. And another message that says, please confirm the refresh. When I did the Facebook temporary access, we automatically refresh the desktop. But when I'm doing something that changes the look and feel of the desktop, so in this case adding a new application, I don't want to just do it to the user. I want to say to the user, it's there and available, but actually you can control when we do that change to your desktop. So I click OK, and we reevaluate the desktop. In this case, we have a managed app, which is access, which is appeared on the bottom left, and on my taskbar, and I now have access to access. And if I now go back in and click on contacts, it opens access up, and presto, it's there. And because we're using automation and IT as a service to deploy these services, they can be taken away the right and the relevant way. So for example, if you get promoted and you no longer need access to a particular data drive or an application or a particular security context, that can be removed from you. So that as you go through, as a user gets promoted, for example, and new users come on at the same level, what IT often tends to do is copy the user's configuration, and then someone else in the organization has got access to things they shouldn't have. So whilst I show that, I'm also going to request paint.net. And the reason I'm requesting paint.net is access in this case is an MSI deployment in the background, but paint.net is an app-v application. So we fully support all the different methodologies for application and configuration, whether it's app-v, thin app, MSI installs, executables, and so on. We can manage those applications and make sure that they're configured correctly and dynamically. So again, already paint.net has been accepted by your manager, and when that comes through the whole workflow system, that will be deployed as an app-v. So in the bottom right-hand corner, I have a little orange box, which is the app-v agent. And I'm just going to confirm the refresh of my desktop, because we have the user control at the moment. And you'll see paint.net will get shown on my desktop. There we go, so paint.net. And if I try and run that, if you watch the bottom right hand corner, you'll see that that gets streamed live. Because we know what the endpoint device is, you can make some decisions around which applications the user gets. If I'm on the terminal services, do I really want to deploy an MSI? If I'm on VDI, I don't want to deploy an MSI. Or do I just want to deploy an AppV or thin app application? So, if I go back to File Manager, the idea is it comes to the end of the day, and I'm going to pull that USB key out. And of course, what will happen is Windows will recognize that it's disappeared very quickly, and then we will remove the manager access to drive T. So the drive T again will dynamically be removed from my access. So I hand that key back to my manager. Again, that could be a service that's only granted for the day, etc. And what the manager wanted, that temporary access, has been completed without any trouble or configuration issues for IT. So I also have another key which I'm just going to plug in. And the example I'm going to demonstrate here is that Jane has a problem that IT can't fix. So the idea is she's rang up the help desk and she's gone through the example, IT help desk run it, they can't find the problem. And the reason is generally that IT are domain admins or they're local administrators. So the problem is usually because Jane is a standard user. So in this scenario, what I've done is the help desk person comes along, plugs their USB key in, and they get access to applications. So for example, access to Orientated to determine what the problems are. But I'm still logged in as Jane. So I've still got the standard user context, still Jane's context, but Regedit is being run in administrative mode. Okay. And then when I walk away, I can just leave the applications open, walk away, just pull the key out, and those diagnostics tools that I have will go away. So, one last one I'm going to show you from a service is a standard request, which is to change a mobile telephone number. So Jane's mobile number is 123, so I'll just give her a new mobile telephone number. Through extensive research, what we've discovered is that users tend to know their own mobile number better than HR departments. And so they're better at determining when things change. So personal information, your name when you get married, your address, your mobile telephone numbers, all those things change for people. And to phone IT up or phone HR up, then HR will make a change, but they'll forget to tell building security or an outsourced telephony company, etc. All those different areas that require something as simple as a telephone number, without any mistakes being made when that's passed around, is it's huge, the number that's required. So again, through automation, what we've done here is we said simple service to the end user that says change my personal details. In this case, it's just the mobile telephone number. And I've got a message already saying my personal details have been accepted by HR. And the workflow could say they have to accept that change and confirm it and make sure that's correct so that people don't put silly things in. And then that goes through the system. And it's gone through the system already. I've actually got confirmation here that tells me, as the end user, that my details have been updated. So rather than ringing up the help desk and waiting for them to update that information, which can take quite a long time, it's actually been done immediately. And just to prove that, if I go into Outlook, and do one channel, which will pop. What I'm going to do is create a new email message, and you'll see in the new email message, I've got a message to say my changes have been made to my personal details, but you'll also notice that the telephone number and the signature of Outlook has been modified. So even the user doesn't have to spend that time configuring or even needing to know how to configure something as simple as signatures. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly, because I'm running out of time, is I'm going to log Jane on to the remote session. So if you remember, we were at XP, we went to the remote session, and in the remote session I left it open with a window that showed the printers that she had, and the fact that it says London congestion charge. So you'll see that things have started to dynamically change. So what's happening is, we've logged in from a different location, and because we know where the actual location is, we'll dynamically modify that terminal services session desktop for Jane so that it's relevant for where she is. Telling her we've got pop-ups saying we've got some new default printers. So, and you'll see here the printers have changed to floor 2 because I'm on floor 2. The background has changed to floor 2. The applications that Jane requested have been pushed across the terminal services session. She's allowed to have those applications. So just because she's gone to a terminal services session doesn't mean they shouldn't be there. They're actually there. And the little star down the left-hand side has now changed to Manchester Metro because she's in a different floor. And what I can also do, if anyone wants to, I'll come to our booth later at booth 11. We can show you some of the other changes that were made. The HR system's been updated. I can prove that it's all happened. We can run through the whole dynamic desktop later as well for you. But finally, what I'm going to show you is just another bit of our technology. So Jane has, on her remote desktop, remember, access to this application, which is corporate streaming of video, or it could just be YouTube HD. And what it's doing is it's running a video. But of course that video is running on the terminal services. It's a high-def video, so I'm not getting the best of experiences from a user perspective. So the reason for that is it's trying to push a lot down the line. It's HD content. It's also hitting the servers hard. The servers don't have graphics cards. It's hitting the CPU because it's emulated to graphics, etc. So I'm doing exactly the same, but using a bit of our technology. And you'll notice those icons weren't there when I came in from XP. They're only available when I came in through Windows 7 machine. This is exactly the same. You notice it's immediately gone full screen within the session. And the actual graphics are a lot better. In fact, it's perfect. And the way we're doing that is we're looking at the endpoint device. And we're saying, whatever that application might be or whatever the service might be, do they exist on that machine? Is that machine capable of running what we need it to run? Has it got enough memory, etc.? And if it exists, actually I'm going to change the icon on the desktop inside the remote session. And when the user clicks on it, we'll run that process. In this case, playing a video, we will do that on the end user machine. So in this case, my laptop. And then we superimpose the output back into the remote session. So as far as the user is concerned, they click on an icon, it works, they can interact with it correctly, it minimizes, it goes on a taskbar, etc. But in reality, it's using the resources of the local machine rather than trying to send lots of information down the network or try to run it on a server where the server might not have the hardware or capability to provide a reasonable experience. So that's just an example of our technology. That's it kind of all working together. And from a user experience from Jane, that was flawless. She went through, she had what she needed to do her job. And from an IT perspective, they know that corporate policies, security, control, auditability, compliance are all guaranteed and all through the system. And with that, I'm going to end the demo and hand back to
Thanks, David. Hopefully that's shown you how we can wrap services, how we can consider all aspects of what we need to do to deliver a service for a user, to make it work for the user, to get it delivered in a working way, in a way that is active for the user, in a very simple way. As David said, come and see us booth 11. There's a couple of key things. Dan Bolton, who's sat over there from Kingston Uni, is an honest chap. He's one of our customers. In exchange for beer tokens, I'm told he'll be honest about using our software. So collar Dan and buy him a drink, and he'll be pretty candid about fairly comfortable with that. Also, if you want to talk about any of the other stuff, you might have seen in the press on Brian's site talk about Hyperdrive, Follow Me Data Services. Come and have a chat with us on the booth. We can show it to you on the booth. We can talk you through how that works. Or if you've got any questions around the whole IT as a service story, just find the guys in orange shirts and we'll be more than happy to talk to you. Has anyone got any questions? Okay, we're running short of time. I do apologise. Yeah, if you want to see us, if you've got any questions, grab the guys in orange shirts and we'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.